Welcome. Wherever you are, maybe preparing for rest, or simply needing a moment of peace, I invite you to step into a story that begins in drought, moves through desperation, and ends in quiet provision. This is a story about obedience in the unknown. About trusting God's voice when everything else feels uncertain. And about how even the smallest act of faith can open the door to miracles. The people in this story are not powerful. They are not rich. They are not mighty in the eyes of the world. But they are seen by God. And so are you. This is Elijah and the widow, 1 Kings 17. The land was dry. Not just in weather, but in spirit. Israel had turned its heart away from God, worshipping false gods, chasing false kings, forgetting the one who had led them from slavery to freedom. And so God sent a drought. No dew. No rain. Day after day, the sun beat down. Crops failed. Wells ran dry. Hope thinned like the clouds overhead. But in the quiet, in the dust, a voice arose. God spoke to a man named Elijah, a prophet from Tishbe in Gilead. Elijah was no celebrity. No nobleman. Just a man who listened. And when God spoke, Elijah obeyed. He stood before King Ahab, a ruler who had led the people into idol worship and rebellion, and declared, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." Then he turned and left. Just like that. No argument. No negotiation. Just a prophet, and silence. The word of the Lord came to Elijah again. "Leave here. Turn eastward and hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I have directed the ravens to supply you with food there." It was a strange instruction. Go into hiding. Depend on birds. But Elijah didn't question. He simply went. And just as God said, the brook flowed with water. And every morning and evening, ravens came. They brought him bread. And meat. Not from fields or markets, but from the hand of God, through the wings of the wild. Elijah drank from the brook. A hidden prophet, cared for in obscurity. Not with abundance, but with enough. Time passed. The drought worsened. The sun blazed down, relentless and hot. And slowly, the brook dried up. What once sustained Elijah now turned to stone. And again, the word of the Lord came. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. Another strange command. Zarephath was foreign territory. A widow was no provider. But Elijah had learned to trust the voice that guided him. And so he rose. And walked. Through dry land. Toward a woman he had never met. To find sustenance in the most unlikely of places. The town of Zarephath lay in the land of Sidon, far from Israel, far from safety, far from what Elijah knew. It was pagan ground. Home to Baal worship. To go there meant stepping into foreign soil, into the unknown. But it was where God was leading. And so Elijah walked. Dust rising around his sandals. Sun beating on his shoulders. No food. No water. Only the word of God and obedience. When he reached the town gate, he saw her. A woman, thin and weary, gathering sticks. Not firewood, just small sticks. The kind used to light one final flame. She was poor. Alone. Bent low by the weight of hunger and grief. But she kept moving. One step. One stick. Elijah called to her. "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink?" She looked up. Perhaps startled. Perhaps cautious. But she turned and went to get it. And as she was going, he called again. "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." She stopped. Turned, and spoke with trembling honesty. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she said, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Her voice did not shake with drama. It was quiet. Final. She had come to the end. The very last of what she had would be used for a final meal. And then, nothing. But Elijah, calm, clear, confident, said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son." He paused. "For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." It was an impossible promise. Make something for a stranger first? When all she had left was enough for a single meal. But something in Elijah's voice, or perhaps in her soul, stirred hope where there had been none. And so, with trembling hands, but obedient steps, the widow went back to her small home, to her near-empty jar, to her near-dry jug. And from them, she made a small cake. She brought it to Elijah, then returned to make more, and more, and more. And just as Elijah had said, the jar was not empty. The oil did not run out. Day after day, there was enough. Not a feast, but enough. For Elijah, for the widow, for her son. A miracle, not in thunder or fire, but in daily bread. In the quiet consistency of provision that never failed. The days passed slowly. Each morning, the widow would go to the jar, scoop flour, pour oil, and make bread. There was no surplus, but there was always enough. Elijah stayed in the upper room of her house, not as a burden, but as a quiet presence, praying, waiting, listening for the next word from God. And for a time, all was well. The drought still scorched the land. But in that small home in Zarephath, there was peace. Until one day, there wasn't. The widow's son, her only child, grew sick. At first it seemed small. A fever. A cough. But it didn't fade. It grew worse. Day by day, breath by breath, until suddenly, the boy stopped breathing. She held him, shook him, called his name. But his chest did not rise. His body stilled. And the miracle she had once tasted turned to ashes in her mouth. She turned to Elijah, grief and fury in her voice. "What do you have against me, man of God?" she cried. "Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" Her words were sharp, but underneath them was sorrow. She had trusted. She had obeyed. And now her child, her only son, was gone. Elijah said nothing in defense. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. Instead, he said gently, "Give me your son." She placed the boy in his arms, and Elijah carried him upstairs, to the room where he stayed. He laid the child on his bed, and then he cried out. "O Lord my God," Elijah prayed, "have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with, by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." It wasn't a formula. It was desperation. Elijah had no power of his own. But he knew the one who gave breath. And he begged for it. Elijah remained there, beside the still body of the boy. The small room was silent. The kind of silence that presses on the chest, that squeezes the air from the room, that speaks of final things. But Elijah did not give in to silence. He prayed. He pleaded. He asked not once, but 3 times. "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." And then, like wind through a window that had long been sealed, it happened. The Lord heard Elijah's cry. The boy's chest lifted. Breath returned. The child opened his eyes. Life, unmistakable, undeniable, filled the room. Elijah looked down, all washing over him. The boy lived. The impossible had happened. But Elijah didn't shout. Didn't weep. He simply gathered the boy in his arms, rose, and walked downstairs. The widow sat still in her home, her eyes heavy with grief. But when Elijah came down and placed her son into her arms, she knew, instantly, that everything had changed. He was warm. He was breathing. He was alive. Elijah looked at her and spoke softly. "Look! Your son is alive." And for a long moment, she said nothing. She held the child she thought she had lost. Ran her fingers through his hair. Felt his breath against her skin. And then, she looked up. "Now I know that you are a man of God," she said, "and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." It was more than a miracle of resurrection. It was a resurrection of faith. The widow had believed enough to obey. She had believed enough to serve. But now she knew. She had witnessed the hand of God. Not just in provision, but in restoration. Not just in bread, but in breath. Her past didn't disqualify her. Her poverty didn't disqualify her. Her place outside Israel didn't disqualify her. God had seen her, chosen her, worked through her. A woman without power, status, or name, chosen to shelter a prophet and carry one of the quietest, most sacred miracles in all of Scripture. Elijah stayed with the widow for many days after that. No more words were recorded between them. No more dramatic moments or loud signs from heaven. But there didn't need to be. Because faith had settled into the walls of that little house. It had taken root in the simple rhythm of daily bread. In the eyes of a child who once lay lifeless, and now ran and laughed. In the steady trust of a woman who once thought her story would end in silence, but now knew it was still being written. There was no audience. No crowd. Just a prophet, a widow, and her son. Living day by day, sustained by God's quiet hand. Sometimes, miracles come with thunder and fire. But sometimes, they come in silence. In a jar that never empties. In a stranger at the gate. In a breath that returns when hope was gone. This story isn't about triumph in front of thousands. It's about faith in obscurity. About saying yes to something small. About offering what little you have, even when it feels like not enough, and discovering that it was never about the size of your gift, but about the size of your God. The widow gave what she could, a handful of flour, a drop of oil. And in return, she received not only provision, but promise. Elijah brought no wealth, no reward, no guarantees. But through him, God reminded her, and us, that his eyes are never far from those the world forgets. That a woman gathering sticks at the edge of a drought-ridden town could be the center of a divine plan. That resurrection doesn't always begin on mountains. Sometimes it begins in kitchens. So tonight, as you settle your thoughts, maybe you feel like that widow. Tired. On the edge of enough. Wondering if anyone sees you. Or maybe you feel like Elijah. Walking into unknown places, unsure of what God is doing next, but willing to trust anyway. Wherever you are, remember this. God sees. God provides. And God restores. The jar won't run dry. The oil will not fail. And even when everything seems to wither around you, when all that's left are a few sticks and a silent prayer, He is still near. Still listening. Still ready. Sometimes the greatest miracles come in the quiet. Sometimes the clearest proof of His presence is the breath that keeps returning, day after day. So rest now. Let your soul be still. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. And even in the drought, even in the silence, God is already working. Sleep peacefully tonight. The God of Elijah watches over you still.